That's too close, man. There was one that got way too close.
I remember declaring that RawTravel would be above petty geopolitics. How naive. I now know that simply existing in society is a political act, and being informed can be the difference between helplessly watching humans suffer or doing something to change it. While travel elevates my soul, it has also opened a Pandora's box of knowledge about our too often cruel inhumanity towards others. I should have paid closer attention to history, but the subject seemed too intangible to appreciate. Travel changed that. Before I first visited Ukraine in 2012, I had no clue about the generational trauma from past brutal occupations or Russia's persistent oppression of the language, culture, history, and people of Ukraine. Or about Stalin's extermination through hunger, Holodomor famine that starved millions. I didn't know much about Soviet terror campaigns or the brutal gulags where Ukrainian intellectuals were sent. Or, more recently, the ham-fisted bumbling that led to the Chernobyl disaster. I knew less about the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, where Russia, the US, and others agreed to ensure Ukraine's sovereignty in exchange for their giving up nuclear weapons. Before 2012, I knew little of this. I certainly didn't realize I'd be back to film in a war zone. This is not a travelogue. It's a love story, a documentary, and at times a comedy, as one man returns to Ukraine to document heroes who try to bend history to a less cruel outcome. This is the story of my summer in Ukraine, Chapter 1.
What's going on?
Good question. Let's get you up to speed. When I first visited Ukraine as a tourist traveler in 2012, Ukraine's president was a Putin puppet, and the government was little more than a Russian satellite. However, during the 2013-14 Euromaidan revolution, that changed. Ukrainians took to the streets and Putin's puppet fled to Moscow. To retaliate for the sin of turning westward, Putin-backed forces invaded Crimea and eastern Ukraine to support proxy separatists. It was a prelude to what was to come. I finally returned to Ukraine twice in 2019. I then witnessed patriotic Ukrainians reveling in their freedom. They were looking forward to turning away from the backward Russian mindset to the democratic ideals of Western civilization. That's when I met talented videographer Anastasia, who would later become a beloved member of the RawTravel crew. Anastasia's family had been internally displaced from eastern Ukraine in 2014 and relocated to Kiev, as she related to me during our first shoot.
A lot of people lost them houses, like my family.
They had to come here and start all over, right?
And start all over, because it's all that you had,
It's gone.
it's gone, yeah.
Just 1 week before meeting Anastasia, I visited the Russian-occupied territory of South Ossetia in the country of Georgia. I began comprehending the scope, scale, and history of Russia's bullying of its smaller neighbors. When Russia's full invasion of Ukraine began in early 2022, Anastasia again had to flee, this time to Paris with her little brother, while her mother and father stayed behind to serve. Anastasia and I returned briefly months later to Western Ukraine to film, where I first tasted being in a country at war.
For you, that must feel really good. So now we have an air raid siren. So let's see what happens. Keep it rolling. A little bit of drama.
But now it's time for my Summer in Ukraine 2023. On this trip, I would stay longer and go deeper to places where body armor was required. There's never a good time to film in a war zone, but just days before my arrival, Russia blew up the massive Kharkiv Dam. It flooded Ukrainian villages and towns in a massive eco-terrorism aftermath that I would witness. Russian military fired on volunteer rescuers and had recently killed another journalist. Getting in and out of a country at war is not simple. I repeated my previous strategy of catching the train from Przemysl, Poland to Lviv, Ukraine.
Back near Przemysl. 1 year later, heading to Ukraine.
Though there were some familiar faces, the flow of refugees was much less. I was delighted to share a train with a friendly bunch, including David, an American volunteer from Seattle, on his second mission in less than a year.
My last trip to Ukraine, when I went to the war zones and I saw people struggle, it was the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my life, period. Just being able to see a poor kid in a village in the war zone struggling. You know, they have no windows, they have plywood as windows, and being able to give the kid a hug, give him some food, give him some candy, evacuate these kids, that's the most rewarding thing of my life. Tomorrow we're headed to Kherson, where the flooding is currently. We got a boat, me and my team, and we're gonna go buy some food, water for animals, people who may need that aid. We're gonna distribute it to people who need it most. And I'm here with 2 large suitcases and a big backpack full of aid, humanitarian aid, medical supplies, boots, socks, all that, and just want to give it out to soldiers who might need it, civilians. That's my plan.
But support in the West was wobbling, just as Putin predicted. Even in next-door Poland, Russian-fueled propaganda was having an impact. Instead of welcoming centers staffed with volunteers feeding refugees, I saw evidence of nationalism and peace proclamations in an ignorant display of false equivalence.
You know, when the war began, everyone I knew supported Ukraine. Everyone had their flags. People were giving aid to Ukraine, sending money to volunteer organizations. And the moment guys like Tucker Carlson started talking about, what they do, started saying the things that they say now, out of nowhere, a lot of my buddies who supported Ukraine at first flipped completely. It's really sad.
Though support was slipping, the situation in Ukraine was more desperate than ever.
Ukrainians are struggling under Russia right now currently. Every day they're shelling, rocket attacks on civilian infrastructure, apartments, grocery stores. The dam was destroyed. People are trying to evacuate people from the flooding in Kherson, and they're being shelled by the Russians while volunteers are risking their lives to save these people. It's just brutal. Incoming right here. Opa! I hope that we live in a day and age where we won't let dictators, we won't let bullies win.
Clearly, opinion polls and social media likes don't inform David's moral compass.
And I'll never complain again with what I have. It's a life changer. Jesus, help us. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Andrew, my Ukrainian-American pal from New York City, was in Lviv, Ukraine, helping his family. He welcomed me at the train station. We had discussed visiting Ukraine together, but I never considered it would be during a war. Our first stop was Andrew's hometown of Pustomate and the cemetery to pay respects to local heroes. Then on to happier pursuits. We visited a family friend's raucous birthday party in full swing, where it sometimes felt like I was the birthday boy. It seems the sufferings of war make expressions of joy even more necessary. The knowledge that on this trip I'd be going deeper into conflict had me on edge. I was jumpier than a salesman missing quota and making stupid mistakes.
I'm locked in this ATM. I can't get out.
Thankfully, 2 young locals and a baby-faced soldier came to my embarrassed rescue.
You gotta push a button to get out? I don't get it.
I felt stupid and silly. I was suddenly claustrophobic. Why? I had read accounts of residents trapped in elevators when Russian missiles took out power. The warning signs for elevators at my hotel did little to calm me. My nerves were still raw when I took the train to Kiev, where missile and drone attacks were more common. My fears were heightened when I learned the apartment I'd rented was on the top floor of an archaic 9-floor Soviet-era skyscraper, and the elevator was rickety, noisy, and tiny.
Let's see if any air raid sirens go off tonight. If they do, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here. I'm on the 9th floor. I'm not getting in the elevator unless I have to. The elevator's tiny. Tiny. It's like a box. Old. scare me. I don't know. I'd never freaked out over elevators before, but.
I had not been to Kiev in years. I was eager to explore my neighborhood.
Day one in Kiev. Just woke up because I got in really late when it was dark, so I'm exploring my neighborhood.
This residential neighborhood was a throwback to Soviet Ukraine and provided insight into authentic Ukrainian culture. Turns out, remaining calm is contagious.
So peaceful. Surprisingly tranquil.
One of my objectives on my trip to Ukraine was to meet up with former U.S. Marine and humanitarian Mark Carey from Arizona. We'd never met, but had spoken several times on the phone. Anastasia had returned to Kiev months earlier and was coming along. Seeing my old pal, who'd weathered so much, cheerful, silly, and hardworking as ever, felt good. We met Mark and his humanitarian partner, Jaime Dunn from the UK, in the Kiev suburb of Irpin. They wanted to tour us around key battle spots of Irpin, Bucha, and Hostomel. When most people rushed out of Ukraine, Mark and Jaime bravely rushed in to help, which is where they met. Jaime had crowdsourced the van and Mark had a Marine know-how. Together, they ran missions to some of the most active areas of the war. After a delicious get-to-know-you meal, Mark and Jaime took us on tour, expressing amazement at how much the area had been rebuilt since their last visit just months earlier.
This street was the scene of a massive battle. These houses, they were blown apart, dude. They were completely destroyed.
The so-called Dead Car Monument stands as a testament to scores of Russian war crimes.
Each one of these cars represents a group of people trying to leave, and we're attacked. Look at these bullet holes. Look how many. And then incinerated. Civilians trying to leave a war zone. Incinerated. This me off.
During the early days of the war, when it seemed Kiev might fall, Irpin and the nearby Hostomel airport were crucial in stopping Russia's advance. Civilians trying to escape were murdered in cold blood by Russian soldiers.
When the full-scale invasion first began, this is where the troops from Ukraine fought back the Russian invasion.
You were in Irpin,
Yeah.
and then you have Bucha, Hostomel,
Yeah.
and that area up there.
Yeah.
That's where the big pushback by the Ukrainians was in order to keep the Russians from circling Kyiv, and then they were able to push them out of the Hostomel airport and kind of stop them from reinforcing their troops. And this car pile is basically a lot of the vehicles that were collected from some of the places that we were earlier, where they were just littering the roads.
Yeah.
And then the Ukrainians very quickly cleaned them up, try to return to normalcy, try to clear the path for transport of whatever in these different areas. And to me, it's a testament of how fast they want to and they're able to get back to normal, or as close to normal as possible.
Our next stop was the village of Michaluche, where Jaime and her donors were supporting Lada's orphanage. Lada is a big-hearted Jewish Ukrainian mother who took in many special needs children even before Russia's invasion. Like nearby Bucha, the site of the infamous Bucha massacre, this small and now sedate village experienced a brutal occupation.
Most of the people hid in their basements. Hospital was bombed, the schools were bombed, and the Russians pretty much occupied the area. I've been to some villages where they moved the entire town into a basement. They kept them down there, and several people passed away, and they murdered people.
Indeed, our visit was the calm after the storm.
It's a nice little village, man. I just hate that these people had to suffer like they did.
Lada's orphanage in the small village of Michaluche, Ukraine, is full of love. Over the years, Lada and her husband have taken in almost 20 children, including this little girl found wandering alone on her town's streets after a Russian missile onslaught.
Понравилось.
After unloading Jaime's donations, Lara wanted to share her story about the 36-day Russian occupation of Mikiluche and her harrowing efforts to get the children to safety.
Це було дуже важко. Вже 24-го почали дуже гучні взриви тут біля нас. І нас бомбили вже над нашим селом, літали літаки російські. І вже 25-го в село зайшло 74 танки. На нашій вулиці був воєнний патруль. І вони переховували свої танки в наших дворах. З поля вони заїжджали в наші двори і ховали тут свої танки. Ми довірялися Господу, ми молилися з дітками. Дітки переховувалися в погребах. А потім, коли ми вже дізналися, що відбувається в Бучі, Буча поруч з нами, коли ми дізналися, що відбувається в Бучі, в мене з'явилася тривога, і я почала думати, як вивезти звідси дітей. Вони почали розстрілювати людей в селі, почали красти машини, грабувати будинки. Вони вчиняли п'яні тут різні такі рухи, такі пісні співали, і це було дуже небезпечно. Я почала думати, як мені вивезти звідси інших дітей, і якраз відкрили в нас зелений коридор, і я відправила всіх дітей звідси. У нас майже вже закінчилася їжа до цього часу, і вже ж не було комунікації всі 36 днів, скільки було окупації, і ще й потім далі. Не було в нас опалення, води, газу не було.
Most children were sent ahead but couldn't legally leave Ukraine without their legal guardian, Lara, so the kids waited at the border. Lara gathered documents and photos and bravely passed through 3 Russian checkpoints. But things changed when she reached the 4th.
І коли я підійшла до їхнього посту, вони навіть не дали мені наблизитися, вони збили мене з ніг і почали дуже жорстоко бити. Хопили за волосся і вдавили обличчям в асфальт і почали трощити всі мої речі.
They accused Lara of spying, and things got even worse.
Потім один офіцер дуже різко підняв мене за волосся, поставив на ноги і вдавив куло автомата сюди в горло. Він дуже вдавлював це дуло і дивився в моє обличчя, дивився в мої очі, а я дивилася в його очі. І я зрозуміла, що я ніколи не бачила таких очей. Це були очі, які не мають кольору, не мають життя, не мають почуттів, не мають форми. Це були 2 провалини. Потім один із солдатів знайшов моє фото з дітьми, підійшов до мене і запитав, це твоя родина? Я сказала, так. І тоді він сказав цьому офіцерові, відпусти, це мати. І офіцер відступив. Я знаю, що мене зберіг Господь. Я довіряла Богу, я йшла до своїх дітей, я повинна була врятувати своїх дітей, і Бог допоміг. Але є в нашому житті сторінки, які не перегортаються. Хотілося б перегорнути і жити далі, але ця сторінка поки що не перегортається.
I'm glad that you were saved, and I'm so sorry that happened to you, but you're safe now, and I can tell you have a lot of love.
One person with one remaining shred of humanity saved Lara's life.
The work you are doing is so important that you have to stay here and share your love, and I'm so happy I met you. Thank you so much. Дякую. Дякую.
Слава Богу.
When others are in need, why do some feel it necessary to answer the call? After Russia's barbaric full invasion in 2022, it was clear Ukraine was in need. Good people of the world pulled together to help them defend their freedom. Against all odds, Ukrainians expelled the invaders from most of their territory. But what Russia could not have, it sought to destroy. In the summer of 2023, the Russians blew up Ukraine's Kharkiv Dam, flooding homes, villages, and farmland in a destructive eco-terrorism event of historical proportions.
Another flooded house.
Alas, by then, surprisingly few noticed as Russian propaganda began to find fertile ground. Streams of volunteers had withered to a trickle, and screams of outrage turned to whiny whimpers of doltish complacency. But not everyone. Humanitarians Jaime Dunn and Mark Carey answered the call. They joined forces with a community of give-a-dammers to help the displaced, despairing, and devastated. I had the honor of tagging along, sharing good times and bad, some scary, some sad. Despite the misery of our mission, it was one of the most memorable trips of my life. So let's all answer the call and get in the van. It's time for My Summer in Ukraine, Chapter 2.
This just says massive air alert.
This visit was just my second to Ukraine since Russia's 2022 full invasion. I was fortunate to be riding along with DIY humanitarians Jaime Dunn and Mark Carey. Together, we'd travel in Jaime's crowd-funded and, yes, sometimes smelly van of humanity. We'd drive from Kiev to Odessa, then perilously close to the front in the beleaguered Kherson city, and finally to Mykolaiv. Jaime and Mark have made this run before, and they quickly showed me the ropes.
Time to hit the WOG.
By now, a stop at the WOG for gas and coffee was a van tradition, but WOG dogs were Mark's specialty.
This thing's got bacon on it. There's some corn on there. Multiple sauces.
Upon arrival in Odessa, we were greeted by an all-too familiar friend.
Massive air alert.
Odessa's location on the Black Sea coast means it's an ideal vacation spot, usually.
Weather's just perfect. Too bad there's a war going on.
Indeed, the war's presence was never far at hand. But when Russia exploded the Kakhovka Reservoir, water flowed over the banks of the Dnipro River, and internally displaced refugees flowed into Odessa. Jaime came to Ukraine with a van load of supplies, but we needed more.
Epicenter.
The aptly named Epicenter store was our main supply point for purchasing water, food, and needed items for places like Odessa's Way Home Foundation. Like many established charities here, their mission had expanded. They must also now help internally displaced refugee families. Their sister organization, Aurora House, has been tasked with helping displaced single mothers and their children. Jaime brought donated laptops for the administrators and cash for refugees.
War. There are a lot of war widows here in this shelter, and the people who've come from Kherson obviously have no possessions at all. They lost everything in the flood, so that's why I want to be particularly generous to this shelter.
Understood.
Since families would have to start all over, items such as kitchen supplies were a requested commodity. But the most heartwarming item was Mark's stash of Knitting Without Borders teddy bears.
Made with love.
War completely disrupted schools in Odessa, but Way Home is trying to fill the gaps. Disrupted learning will last a lifetime, as will the trauma. The mothers from Russian-occupied areas told tales of abuse at the hands of Russian soldiers. Many of their husbands were tortured and killed. Food shelves were empty, and they'd had no health care for months. Out of respect for their trauma, I did not film their emotional testimony.
It's shocking when you hear that kind of first-hand story.
Mark and Jaime's donations were, of course, greatly appreciated, but the needs were endless.
There's so much to do, and we're only 2 people with, people moving in and out of the team, and so it's just going to be a never-ending job. But as far as us, I'm happy with what we did here.
We are just immensely grateful for everybody for supporting us, because if they feel they can trust us to spend that money responsibly and that they see an end result, that they see they're actually making a positive, real impact, really touching people's lives, that's so important. So thank you.
Shopping. It was time to restock the van and head to Kherson, Ukraine, where flooding had devastated surrounding towns and villages. Kherson's pre-war vitality was a memory. It was now a ghost town. Though recently liberated, Russians were just across the river and shelled the city daily. To prepare, we put on body armor, and Mark gave us a quick lesson in tourniquet application.
You're gonna put this on. This is called the windlass. You start cranking this windlass down, boom, 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 until the bleeding stops.
Okay. Our first stop was the local Baptist church, where we dropped off supplies and met Tanya, a homegrown photographer and volunteer.
Give us a tour? Okay.
The church basement served as a shelter for up to 500 neighbors during the occupation. Now it was being converted to guest quarters for flood cleanup volunteers, catching a much-deserved rest.
Imagine 500 people being down there.
But as Russia has demonstrated time and again, neither churches, schools, nor apartments are safe.
Do you know how much misery Russia has caused? Oh my God. What's going on over there?
I briefly left the relative sanctuary of the church to see a recently bombed apartment building nearby.
This is not a military target. This is civilian. They were occupied, then the flooding, and now the constant bombing. It's just one miserable thing after another.
We wanted to visit the small village of Oleksandrivka, about an hour outside of Kherson City. Besides the smell of flooding, the village is routinely bombed, and the school was destroyed. Mark, Jaime, and Tanya planned to see about fundraising to build a mobile library for the kids. But the drive over, in full view of Russian forces, would be risky.
So over there, Russians? Yeah, like 5 kilometers.
We'd need permission to continue through several Ukrainian checkpoints.
Yeah, is that okay?
Alas, we were turned away. Ukrainian security deemed it too dangerous to visit that day. I was both disappointed and relieved, but Tanya offered to show us downtown Kherson City, once a thriving area of coffee shops and parks, now desolate. Despite artillery rumbling nearby, I ambled out of the van to do what I came to do.
Yeah, in Kyiv, I tried to make money and to work, and here I volunteer and serve people.
Okay. Well, that's why you came back to Kherson to help your neighbors?
Yeah. Yes.
For Tanya, the desolation was disquieting.
My city is not big, but there's always like some moving. But when you see that it is always noise like this, and it is a lot of destruction and no people, like no hope, you know.
As for me, it was the unfamiliar sound of shelling that had me unsettled.
Right now we hear shelling in the background, pretty loud. Does that not concern you at all? Or are you used to it by now?
Unfortunately, I used to it by now because you can hear it every day. I think every hour. And maybe at first day it is bothering you, but step by step, it becomes okay for you. It's like your routine, unfortunately.
So, because I'm nervous.
I understand you, and it's okay.
This park was once abuzz with activity.
It's like a little square, and there are park there, and it is bombed also.
That's the one.
Yeah,
Destroyed.
and it's also like, yeah, you can see a lot of stuff like this.
Some in the US suggest we listen to what Putin has to say.
We can show what Putin did, so I don't know if we need to say to hear what he said. I think we can see everything he wants to say like this.
Tanya is circumspect about the future of her beloved Kherson.
At first, I was full of optimistic, and after this disaster was water from the Kakhovska gas, I understand that it will be so hard to do something here, and I don't know. What I know for sure that I will try to do everything that I can.
Mortars were getting closer. It was time to leave. Alas, we got a genuine taste of daily life in Kherson while driving to Mykolaiv.
That's too close, man. What the dude? Was that it? Bro? That's close. There was one that got way too close. Way too close.
Mykolaiv was just an hour away and had suffered mightily as well during the Russian occupation. But on this day, compared to Kherson, Mykolaiv was a relative sanctuary, and we all breathed a sigh of relief when we returned safely. Nonetheless, I was still processing my first day under bombardment.
Today was extremely intense. It's the air raid sirens. Heard those before, but never this close to the front. Real people are suffering, man. They have to go through this day in and day out, and I feel for them so much. This is horrible, man. Unnecessary.
Just a few hours in a frontline town had me rattled. Imagine living with this anxiety day in and day out.
Just brutal.
Answering the call can take a toll.
Yeah, videotaping me urinating.
No, but the audio's good.
After a night's rest, I recovered my optimistic demeanor, and we were all hopeful that our second day in Kherson, Ukraine, would be less stressful.
Yesterday was a little hairy, but yeah, hopefully we won't have.
My first day was like baptism by fire. And when I saw these guys getting concerned, I got concerned.
That's the thing about it is they're not aiming at anything. They're just a bunch of drunk dudes sitting back there pulling the cables.
Just messing with everybody,
Yeah,
basically.
they're just
They got nothing better to do.
Nope, they're just
bored.
terrorizing the city.
All right, we better get rolling because our only air conditioning is the windows down and it's hot. So see you in a bit, hopefully.
Russian looting and senseless violence were evident.
No car dealerships, huh?
They're all looted by the Russians.
Stole them.
Yep. Stole everything.
Before retreating, Russians needlessly and spitefully killed rare fish species at a university.
They poured petrol into their aquarium, killed all these rare fish, and then they left. And now these guys have to rebuild this. And some of these fish were very rare.
They poured gasoline in there just to watch them die. Yeah.
So it just basically destroy and leave nothing
Exactly.
behind.
Exactly. And the guys were talking about how they stole their shovels, they stole all their laboratory equipment, they stole everything.
Support Kherson is a group comprised of dedicated locals who returned after Russia's retreat. They gathered clothing, medicine, food, and cleanup supplies for volunteers. After dropping off our donations, we reluctantly bid adieu to our brave new pals and returned to the church for yet another supply drop. The church is a gathering spot for residents and foreigners, and it's where I met a volunteer from my neck of the woods. Jersey is both his alias and his home state.
Right on.
Jersey heard the call loud and clear.
I have family who are from Eastern Europe. I just thought to myself, I think I'm going to do it. I'm here because these people deserve the space and time to decide what kind of future they actually want. And if Russia has its way, it'll be deprived of that.
Like others who've witnessed the brutality of Russian aggression, there's no love lost for this so-called special military operation.
It's just pure barbarism what Vladimir Putin is doing. He's the Adolf Hitler of our time, and that's no joke.
You don't want to veer too far off the road because this area is mined, heavily mined.
Okay. So right now, as we speak, we're on this tiny road. Each side is heavily mined, so we have to be careful. And it's made even more difficult because the roads are really, really bumpy, as you can tell. And also, when you meet traffic, you do have to pull over a little bit. So it's a little hairy because you don't want to pull over too far that hasn't been demined. So the Russians left a little gift for everybody, including humanitarians.
The flooding from the exploding Kharkiv Dam in Ukraine meant that Russian landmines were displaced, land was poisoned, and water was undrinkable. We had an opportunity to work with local chapters of the Red Cross to help install a large portable water tank so villagers could store and access safe drinking water. Despite floodwaters, the first village we visited miraculously still had electricity.
They've never had a laptop in this village before.
Really? Wow, that's a brand new laptop.
Yes.
All right, let's go do it.
Yeah.
Jaime gifted the mayor's office one of her donated laptops. The next village was less fortunate.
We're walking along this village where the floodwaters just receded a few days ago. It smells really bad. Crops are ruined. A lot of the houses are uninhabitable. Not sure what's in the air, but it's not good. And, you know, this place wasn't wealthy to begin with.
We were invited to Valentina's house, which was devastated. Her daughter, Natalia, had returned home to help.
Ah, very nice, very nice. Yeah, good, good, good.
I could tell Valentina's house was once a lovely home. Now, it was an uninhabitable disaster.
So it came up even higher than this. It came up as high as this. Yeah.
І коври були, і тюлі, все, бух. Все, нічого нема. О, так от чому стояти. Глина, все погано було. Нема.
It's like 54 years of her life.
Все. 54 роки в місті хазяйнували і...
You see that they had a really beautiful home.
54 years destroyed in just a matter of hours at the behest of an absurdly wealthy dictator.
Here's all their possessions.
Yet Valentina was unbowed.
And so...
Хай живе Україна.
Yes. Slava Ukraina.
Да, слава Україні. Да, героям слава.
I'm with you.
Дождемося все одно. Побідемо.
Despite Valentina's exuberant and defiant energy, the heartbreaking reality is that this village's homes are almost all beyond repair, and their land will be toxic for decades.
Another flooded house. God, it smells so bad. It's poison. Oh.
But answering the call requires action, so we scouted an ideal location for the water tank installation and got to work. Well, most of us. Despite the misery of our mission, it was a beautiful day. The kids were out on their bikes, and for a moment at least, war seemed far away.
It's hard to believe this country's at war when you're in a place like this. You can get sucked into feeling the peace and the normalcy, and you're quickly reminded people are suffering.
Indeed, the calm serenity was merely a mirage.
I just heard some artillery fire, or maybe even a missile. It was a huge boom, and now I see smoke right over there. I hope everything's okay, but I don't know.
Russia, the US, and others pledged security to Ukraine in exchange for their giving up nuclear weapons in 1994. They also promised to respect Ukraine's territory and refrain from military force. Russia broke its promises when it annexed Crimea in 2014 and broke them yet again with the full invasion in 2022. Indeed, the Budapest Memorandum is just one of many promises Russia has broken. So what about my country, the United States, home of the free and land of the brave, the very country Ukraine wishes to emulate? Perhaps for some, promises are empty words, but where I'm from, a promise is a commitment that must be fulfilled. I promised to return to Ukraine to help in any way I could, and I did. Sometimes to my fearful chagrin, but always to my spiritual enrichment. It's time to keep my promise to visit the beautiful, historic, but devastated city of Kharkiv, Ukraine. It's time for My Summer in Ukraine, Chapter 3. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city. Because it's only 20 miles or so from the Russian border, it was exposed to a relentless onslaught of propaganda from Russian media for decades. But after a brutal attack beginning in 2022, any affinity for Russia was quickly replaced by what can only be described as loathing. Humanitarians Jaime Dunn and Mark Carey were heading from Kiev to Kharkiv for another mission. They had room in Jaime's crowd-funded van for 2 more. So I invited my talented young friend and videographer Anastasia along, who quickly demonstrated she had not lost her appetite for work or food. After a brief stopover in lovely Poltava, we continued to Kharkiv for our first drop-off at the European tradition of charity.
Heat retaining blankets, utility gloves, things like that are really hard to get. Mark has brought them here, and he's going to give them to his friend who's going to be able to disperse them into the field.
Roman and Nastia are locals who run the Kharkiv branch of ETOC. After dropping off our load, they joined us for dinner, where we tried our best to keep their spirits high.
Wow, that's a lot of beer.
Imagine working all day while relentlessly being bombed all night. That evening, Anastasia and I need not imagine. We'd each had a fitful night trying to sleep as Russian bombs encircled our hotel.
It's this air is home.
Okay, but we're here just outside.
Our walk through downtown Kharkiv to film was downright pleasant, but my imagination was running wild. Locals often hear phantom air raid sirens as well.
No.
I keep thinking I hear it. Yet they still carry on with a sense of normalcy. Perhaps there is no better place to illustrate this point than Kharkiv's picturesque Central Park.
Today in the park is so quiet and tranquil, it's hard to believe that last night we were all awakened by explosions, multiple explosions. Luckily, thankfully, no casualties, at least last night, but Kharkiv has been bombarded off and on, beginning since the very early days.
The historic park was rebuilt after World War II. In 2022, it again sustained heavy damage when Russia tried, but failed, to take the city.
You can see where they repaired, where the holes were, is in white on the ride, and then you can still see the pock marks in the pavement.
Though the amusement park was no longer in use, families with children refused to be cowed by Russia's bullying.
They could care less if it hit civilians or kids, innocent kids.
The shrapnel-damaged monuments gave me a better understanding of how Russian mortar fragments do their deadly deeds.
These are not real, but a lot of dead children are.
During my visit, the U.S. was still keeping its promises to Ukraine, and total strangers were appreciative. Old and young, my new friends understood the importance of keeping a promise.
America, I love you.
Kharkiv, Ukraine successfully fought off Russian invaders in 2022. Still, the city's proximity to Russia means it's anything but a safe haven. The locals who remained were defiantly determined to retain their sense of fun. Icy is a local Kharkiv musician and entrepreneur. His club, LF Music, was the go-to spot for live entertainment, but the war hurt his business mightily and musicians moved to safer cities. So Icy shifted the club into volunteer mode, creating a retreat for soldiers who needed a break anytime, day or night.
Yeah, we work here like 24/7 because I live here.
Icy wasn't figuratively speaking. He must now literally live at work because Russians destroyed his apartment.
I lost my apartment and I lost my business. So when the war started, completely all work stopped.
Correction, all paid work stopped. Icy is tireless in his support for local troops. LF Music hosted events to raise funds and maintain morale for beleaguered locals and volunteers.
Deliver food for military, for civilians, help to make evacuation for the civilians, and we try to do some small events to support moral condition of all people.
You can never forget about the war, but you at least can put it in the back burner for a while. Is that correct?
Reboot.
Yeah, reboot. Exactly.
War is never far from anyone's mind.
The rockets hit here, here, that place, and 3 there.
Right, right.
So less than 300 meters.
So living for today is a mantra for many.
When you live in this city, Frontline city, every day can be last day.
Right.
So you don't need to think about the future, you need to think about right now.
Right.
What I can do right now, today, exactly in this hour,
yeah,
to help the people who are around me.
Though Icy continues to support soldiers and his neighbors, LF Music was closed soon after our visit. Yet another price paid by those simply trying to remain free.
Freedom is not the things that you get pretty easy and pretty cheap.
Right.
As Anastasia and I made our way to the hotel at curfew, all hopes of a tranquil night's sleep were shattered by air raid sirens amid complete darkness.
So you're gonna go to the shelter tonight? If you hear any boom?
I hear any boom,
Any boom?
very close to me.
Thankfully, our hotel had a bougie bomb shelter should we need it. However, unluckily for us, a water line was damaged, so basic hygiene was not even an option. Luckily for you, this isn't smell-o-vision. Dmitry and Maria are Anastasia's friends, and Kharkiv is their home. They graciously agreed to show us around.
Yeah, you see 5 people.
5 people died.
5 people died.
In the early days of Russia's invasion, dozens of missiles struck Kharkiv. With virtually no air defense or safe evacuation routes, these strikes were particularly deadly, especially for children.
A lot of people were sleeping when the Russia attacked.
Right, right.
And a lot of kids were killed in their beds.
And it seemed to me Russia fires indiscriminately, whether it's military or a playground, it doesn't matter to them. It just, whatever.
War seems most difficult for the very young and very old.
I know that Russians, they didn't help even elderly people with simple drugs when they occupied those territories.
Dima's a diabetic, but he and Maria were able to escape to the relative safety of Western Ukraine and thankfully live to tell us their stories. The road from Russia to Kharkiv, Ukraine still has Russian tank tracks embedded in the pavement.
The war began over here.
The Kharkiv suburb of Saltivka is on the way and was ground zero for the Battle of Kharkiv.
So when the war began, they were still here in these apartment buildings. So a lot of people died in this space, correct?
Yes.
The Russians were repelled, but not before killing, wounding, or displacing thousands. Some were likely still buried in the rubble.
Your theory is that there may be body parts still here that weren't recovered, and people are actually living next door where there's livable space.
A lot of places was rebuilt. A lot of playgrounds for kids were rebuilt.
Yeah.
We understand that life is going on, and we need to live this life.
Right.
We cannot just wait when it's become better.
Yeah.
We are making our life better, so we decided, why to wait?
Right.
Once home to 300,000 souls, this suburb now has only a few hundred people, some now living in tents. Svetlana's family lived here for years. Miraculously, they survived their home's bombardment. They were here picking up belongings, but had no intention of returning to live.
Will they tear down these buildings, or will they try to rebuild? What do you think?
I don't want to live here.
Yeah, no matter. Okay.
I want to get new.
Okay.
I don't blame them and can only imagine their trauma. By now, I'm unsurprised at tales of Ukrainian resilience. Maria is a voice teacher, and her income was also disrupted by Russia's attacks. But soon enough, her students were clamoring to return.
I decided we must sing again. I was so surprised. People came and came.
Through air raid sirens and bomb attacks, Ukrainians still sang.
You can't let a little thing like a war stop the human spirit, yeah?
Yeah, we still sing because it's like, like a meditation. So
right.
Yes.
Heroics in Kharkiv are not limited to Ukrainians. Paul Hughes is the Canadian founder of the aptly named HUGS organization.
Welcome to HUGS. Hello.
HUGS provides food to internally displaced refugees, toys, laptops, and activities for kids, as well as crucial car repairs for other volunteer organizations.
This is a gas tank that we fixed.
This successful businessman, activist, and farmer once ran for mayor in Calgary. So maybe that's why he knows so many important folks.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Zelensky. Bye-bye.
And has such a sense of humor. But bullies, beware.
I'm not the biggest fan of Russia. Plus, I'm a Canadian.
Paul is a military veteran who came to Ukraine almost immediately after the full-scale invasion and has never left.
What keeps you here?
Oh, there's just so much work to do. Yeah. I mean, it's endless. It's unrelenting and it's endless. It's in my DNA. I just like helping people.
Though Paul's performed hundreds of missions, one harrowing mission early on stands out: rescuing a young child separated from her parents and trapped in Russian-occupied territory.
If somebody says go and help a 6-year-old girl, you're gonna say no?
The trip almost cost him his life when he was captured and detained by the Russian military.
I'm gonna live. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna live. Like, probably 20 times.
Ultimately, a mutual passion for ice hockey helped convince a Russian commander to let him go and complete his mission.
Okay. She's doing really well, and she's gonna have a life because she wasn't gonna have much of a life where she was.
Canadians are notoriously nice, but for Paul, it's more than politeness. When helping the vulnerable, like the elderly, children, or animals, It's okay. Paul has the heart of 20 humans, but he has help, lots of it. Dozens of volunteers from around the world make HUGS work.
People come for whatever period of time they can contribute. So if you can help, then we'll find a role for you.
Paul's son, Mackenzie, joined his father early on.
I came to help not just my dad, but I came to help Ukraine. Even if it's just help fix one car, deliver one food bag or box or a hygiene kit to somebody, or help organize one mission. It's one step in the right direction. It's one more thing that is helping Ukraine.
I did not want to say goodbye to my new friends at HUGS, but I promised I'd be back. So, you know what that means.
You guys are doing awesome work. I really appreciate it. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you so much.
Anastasia's father's troop had been fighting nonstop, and she had not seen him in months. But he was coming to Kharkiv, Ukraine to get supplies. I was excited to finally meet him in person. Anastasia was properly giddy.
There we go. All right, man. Hello.
After a brief but poignant introduction, we piled into the truck and headed to dinner. But my American-sized emotion was no match for Alexander's military-ingrained, stoic exterior. The following day after breakfast, we asked Alexander to have his platoon sign our flag. Later, we'd auction off the signed flag to raise money for my American friend Yaro, who bravely volunteered to fight in Ukraine. It was time for Alexander to go back to the front, yet Anastasia's goodbye was sweet and short. Unstoic me had to try to follow suit and keep it together.
Good luck, my friend. Okay, okay.
As Alexander drove away like he was driving to the corner store for milk, I promised myself that I would help his troop in any way I could. Kharkiv is a cultural center and college town. Though Russia destroyed many universities, Ukrainian students bravely persisted in their education.
So there is some in-person schooling for the schools that weren't bombed.
Misha is a remote tech worker who lives in a neighborhood surrounded by universities. His entire neighborhood was a soft target, particularly in the early days of the invasion.
At the start of the war, it was a really big problem because the Ukrainian military hasn't got much aircraft shelters, and defense.
Russia continues to bombard Kharkiv, but due to support from allies, it's much safer than in the early days of the invasion.
Obviously, they don't care if it's military or civilian, they can really care less.
And many was killed.
Every part of Misha's life has been impacted by war. Even his gym was bombed. But an interrupted fitness routine was the least of Misha's problems.
The Russian is really wants to occupy, wants to kill you, wants to destroy your not only future, but the future of your relatives.
While not directly attributed to war, there was no doubt in Misha's mind that the stress of the invasion contributed to his beloved grandparents' demise.
There's many indirect ways that war kills. It's got to be difficult.
Misha wanted to show us a more typical bomb shelter than the one at our hotel, the humble root cellar. But a new mother dog had other ideas.
All right, guys, this is a real bomb shelter that people use. They were down here for like 2 weeks at a time. And it's eerily quiet, but you can imagine bombs going off. And there's a little spider. There we go.
It's like a full bomb shelter that was built in 1920 maybe.
In the 20s, okay.
So it's for,
So here you are using it 100 years later. Yeah.
Until you go under the
crawl underneath. Yeah. Oh wow, second exit. That's good. If the mean dog is out front, we may have to take that exit.
As simple as this root cellar is, it housed the lucky ones. When the invasion began, bomb shelters like air defenses were in short supply. Maybe it was decades of propaganda, but it seems Kharkiv never imagined that their so-called brothers would break their promise and try to exterminate them so ruthlessly.
Let's get some fresh air.
Staying sane in a war is challenging. I can leave, but Misha can't. He took me to his go-to retreat, just steps away from his apartment, where I reflected on my first trip to Kharkiv.
Why would someone destroy cities like Kharkiv, kill innocent civilians? It just really boggles the mind. It's hard to wrap my brain around it. It's Neanderthal behavior. The Ukrainian people are not going to let this stop them. And we, the rest of the world, should do everything we can to help them.
I made a promise and kept it. It felt good. However, it was tempered by the realization that my country had not adequately upheld its end of the bargain to defend Ukraine. So I made another promise that I would do everything I could to ensure it ultimately does. Of the scores of countries I've visited, including China, Cuba, Vietnam, and Nicaragua, Russia is the only one where I was followed, intimidated, and harassed by government forces. Back then, I naively thought the bad old days were over. I was wrong, but not alone. After years of misreading Russia, Western leaders must finally grasp the grim reality. Russia has been at war with the civilized world for years. Decades of spreading deadly disinformation and conspiracy theories, downing civilian airliners, silencing dissidents, hacking, spying, election interference, and nuclear blackmail make it clear that nowhere is safe from Russia's malignant maliciousness. It can sometimes feel like Russia is winning and the free world is wobbling. But Ukraine showed me that courage is contagious, and while evil works hard, we can work harder. Ukraine was a peaceable nation struggling to overcome its Soviet past and the politics of corruption, intolerance, and fear that Russia peddles. So, Russia invaded, and Ukraine realized they must fight for peace. I think we should help, because I don't want to live in a world where the ignorant rule the wise, the corrupt subjugate the honorable, and the cowards oppress the courageous. It's time for the world's good people to unite to counter the deadly propaganda, call out the craven apologist, reject the resets, and grip the reality to fight for peace. It's time for My Summer in Ukraine, Chapter 4. Traveling to a country at war is unpredictable. I was in Ukraine after Russia had recently exploded the Kharkiv Dam, unleashing a massive eco-terrorism event of biblical proportions. However, potentially worse, Russia occupied one of Europe's largest nuclear power plants in Zaporizhia. They were threatening a false flag nuclear calamity, and all of Ukraine was on edge, including me. I wanted to see if I could obtain iodine pills just in case nuclear disaster struck.
Let's see if they have them.
But to no avail.
So just as I suspected, they do not have them. I'll keep trying.
So I embraced the Ukrainian mantra of remaining calm and fighting on. Fighting an unscrupulous but better equipped enemy like Russia requires innovation. Ukrainians are masters at the do-it-yourself variety. They were converting consumer drones into fighting machines.
So we have all types of drones working to win the war.
Ukrainian videographer Anastasia had a friend who helped us obtain access to one of the new privately funded kamikaze drone schools. We ventured out on a beautiful but windy summer day to run maneuvers with the student soldiers on their final training day. They were from different regiments, and each would take their skills back to their division to use on the battlefield.
Боковий вітер дуже сильний.
The day began with classroom and flight simulator training. Many of these young soldiers grew up on video games. I did not, and it shows.
Oh, man.
As we headed out to maneuvers in the field, I first noticed their use of privately owned vehicles, which seemed more at home on the freeway than on the farm.
Sorry, they need trucks. These guys need trucks.
However, the lack of military vehicles was a relatively minor concern.
That's mine, but this right here is safe, yeah? Yeah. Okay.
Russians briefly occupied and mined this land in the early days of the full invasion. To avoid getting blown up, we stayed on a demined path, and I needed no convincing to follow directly in the team's footsteps.
Дрон готовий до арму.
Soldiers tested their skills at covertly setting up under camouflage and hitting a remote target under real-world conditions.
So a drone can fly this?
Yeah. For practice, the drones are unarmed, and care is taken to ensure they can be used again.
Basically, the guys are just honing their skills, and they turned off the power just before it hit the target here so that it would not do damage to the drone. And obviously this is soft, so this drone will live to fly and hopefully fight another day.
Lessons on drone repair and obstacle course training help complete a 10-day training course. At the end of the training, students received their degrees and awards for individual outstanding achievement, and their camaraderie was palpable. They were now ready to put their skills to the test and their lives on the line to fight for peace.
Слава Україні! Молодці хлопці!
They're so fast, it's screaming.
I was honored to observe a drone school in an undisclosed area of Ukraine. The drones are a low-budget way for Ukrainians to defend themselves against morally unrestrained Russian aggressors. They are often homemade with parts funded by supporters from abroad and patriotic Ukrainians. Like Oleksiy, an IT specialist turns drone school patron. The entire school was pulled together with the help of volunteers and friends.
As you can see, everything here just made by ourselves. Our team are working on developing our drones, and a lot of other volunteers are working on it.
For Ukraine, winning the war means saving lives. Drones can help them do this.
The first aim is to save lives.
There is no safe way to have a war, but it's a little bit safer if you can operate at a distance, correct? And that's what a drone gives you, correct?
Sure.
Yeah.
For Russia, this is a war of choice, and their soldiers are mere cannon fodder. For Ukraine, this is a war for survival, and each human life is revered.
As I said, our main idea to save lives.
Saving the lives of people like Ole, a software engineer turned soldier.
You know, I decided that if it comes to a all-out war, sure, I'm gonna go and fight for Ukraine, so now it happened.
Few want peace more than those putting their lives on the line.
We all want the war to end, and war is bad, you know, but, you know, you have to do what you have to do.
But peace with Russia must be won.
Це моя земля, тут мої батьки, моя жінка. Я тут народився, і я буду сражатися за кожний метр цієї землі до останньої своєї краплі крові.
Victor studied to be a school teacher, but now he's fighting for freedom.
I don't want that Russians will tell me what to do here and how to think, how to speak, how to behave.
Drones exemplify how a big heart plus creative smarts can prevail over brute strength.
It helps to be more efficient in the battlefield.
Chechnya, Syria, and now Ukraine. Russia's track record of terrorism against civilians is not only abhorrent, but inexcusable.
Since it is such a modern times and it's a technological war, why do you think Russia is unable to stop hitting civilian targets?
I think they, when they plan to attack the military base, they don't check is there anywhere playground of children they can hit. They hit the child and no soldier was wounded. They will say there was soldiers and this child probably was also a supporter.
Killing children and targeting civilians are just a few of many Russian war crimes, but Victor vows repercussions.
They will pay for it in Ukraine because we don't want to live with this.
Military kitchen.
Anastasia and I were invited to a celebratory goodbye meal, during which Ukrainian innovation was again on full display. I thought about how just months earlier, many of these soldiers were mere civilians. Now, some may never return home to their families. I was honored and privileged by this experience and a bit surprised by my emotions. Then it occurred to me why. Freedom is not hegemony. It's a fundamental human right. And like peace, it's worth fighting for.
Freedom is a thing you can feel.
I've been impressed by how much Ukrainians love their country, but thanks to Russia, deep pain is the price of this love. While some have paid the ultimate price, everyone pays something. There are tens of thousands of amputees in Ukraine already. Volodymyr is a successful businessman, but he understands living in a free society made his success possible. He and his English-speaking assistant, Marta, took me to see a military hospital. It didn't take long to understand why they were so passionate about helping these freshly injured soldiers.
В першу чергу це військові поранені, які втратили кінцівки, які захищали Україну, і вони мають право на те, щоб їх нормально лікували, нормально повернутися до життя, протезування і так далі. Їм вкрай необхідна така допомога в тих питаннях.
Volodymyr's counterpart, Galina, came for one visit and never left.
Why do you care so much about these soldiers?
Тому що я знаю, що я зможу, і це мій фронт боротьби. І ми не можемо лишити людей, які ризикують своїм життям, на призволяще, і ми мусимо їм допомагати стати на ноги, стати фізично на ноги і стати сильними духовно.
With her sons serving in the war, perhaps it's also a chance to express her motherly instincts.
І це є психотерапія. Це все, коли родина, коли велика українська родина, хоч вона пройшла і такий шлях трагічний.
As the team toured me around to meet the patients, I could easily see that Galina practices what she preaches. Alexander was injured in the battle to retake Kherson several months before.
Today this leg doesn't work, but Alexander very hope that in future that leg will work.
So you still have some feeling.
His recovery is painful and slow, but ongoing.
Hopefully a prosthetic here.
Yeah.
This leg will recover and Alexander will be able to walk.
Yeah, we hope.
That's the hope, yeah?
Yes, we hope.
Oleg's injury was serious, but less severe than Alexander's.
Отут, оця частина, то, що йому звідси брали шкіру і приживляли.
Remarkably, it only took him 1 month to master the obstacle course.
Wow. Wow. Very nice.
Я горжуся нашим.
Like many institutions in Ukraine, the hospital is overwhelmed by the war and is understaffed and underfunded. Through donations and volunteers, the hospital carries on and can address a variety of battle injuries.
Молодець.
Oh, yeah.
Молодець. Він приїхав до нас, вона взагалі не рухала.
When faced with such grave injuries, a positive attitude is paramount. Galina's loving and upbeat spirit is crucial to their recovery.
Hello, how are you? Robert.
Anatoly.
As I met these and other wounded warriors, I was struck by the atmosphere of solidarity and love despite their devastating injuries.
Our guys is unbreakable, yes, and is very brave, and we will survive in any way, and we will win.
I agree, 100%.
I had tried to steel myself for the sadness of this assignment. Instead, after meeting these heroes, I felt hopeful optimism and tremendous admiration. As I wound up my tour admiring the artwork the patients had created, I was told that remarkably, amputees often return to fight with their brothers. Then I thought about the folks back home who glibly lectured me that little Ukraine could never defeat mighty Russia. But unlike me, they have not experienced the indomitable spirit of these heroes and the hardy resilience of the people of Ukraine.
І наше серце для вас, для американського народу.
One survival response to living in a war zone is to try to normalize things. For Ukrainians, stoicism is second nature. For me, not so much. Yet I found the calmness and courage of Ukrainians contagious. As the end of my travels approached, I discovered I did not wish to leave. Alas, the time to return home was drawing nigh, but only after experiencing another innovative way that Ukrainians have adapted to fight for peace. In Kiev, Anastasia and her boyfriend Vlad invited me to a vegan festival, raising money for troops on the front lines.
Let's check out the vegan festival.
As the name suggests, the vegan festival was a great place to grab some delicious healthy food, which we took full advantage of. But the festival was way more than food and music. It was a chance for war-weary Ukrainians to support each other. Morj is the friend of a punk rock friend of mine. In peacetime, we'd likely have met at a rowdy punk concert, but these are not peaceful times.
I want calm music and everything relaxed.
If everyday life is chaos,
Yes.
you need to calm down, right?
Morj is originally from Crimea, which Russia illegally invaded and annexed in 2014. Like many, he never fathomed that Russia would also try to take Kiev.
So it has to feel like Russia and Putin is trying to steal your home
Twice.
2 times.
Twice, yes.
To a visitor, events in Kiev can project a false sense of normalcy. But dig deeper, and there is worry. Hardly anyone doesn't have a friend or family member who is in danger of or has already been killed or wounded while fighting for peace.
Every time you speak again about the war and your friends who died or who were injured. This is exhausting experience.
Staying productive helps, so perhaps that's why every Ukrainian I met contributed somehow to the war effort. Morj and his friends created a company that provided vegetarian meals ready to eat, or MREs, for vegetarian soldiers on the front lines.
And a lot of our customers went to the front lines and they said, guys, we need some vegan food. We made food and sent them to the front lines, to those who fight.
I too am a vegetarian, but I marvel at how anyone can be so disciplined about their diet under such life and death stress.
Those who are on front lines in severe conditions, they are still have a strong bond to not killing animals. They are still vegan, and we have to support them any kind of way.
One of the many things I've noticed about Ukraine is how much people love their animals. And you can judge a lot by a society by how well they treat their animals.
I think the main difference between Ukraine and Russia that love lives here in Ukraine and doesn't live there in Russia, because they are enemies to themselves. They don't feel themselves loved, and they don't have the feeling of love to each other.
Right.
So, and here in Ukraine we have strong bonds among the people. We love each other. There are a lot of people to love here, and I have that feeling in me.
Ukraine's history is fraught, and just as today, much misery emanates from Russia. Yet somehow, most Ukrainians exude love and light.
Every dark time ends and the light happens, so I truly believe that someday we'll see that, and I hope that it will come as soon as possible.
As soon as possible, man. Good times are coming, man. Good times are coming.
For
Hang
sure.
in
there. Good times are coming for Ukraine. I genuinely believe this. But as I reluctantly said goodbye to my friends to catch a train to Poland and a flight back to the US, I couldn't help but worry about them and wonder how much more needless suffering they would absorb from Russia before the good times finally come. And then I remembered, sometimes to have peace, you must fight for it. Ukrainians are more than doing their part. Now it's time for us to do ours.
Is it that cool?
Whoa! Hey! Nicely done. Bye-bye. 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 What do you say? До побачення. До побачення. До побачення.